All right, me. It is sometime in late June. I don't know the exact date. Um, but today I started and finished reading Willa Cather's O Pioneers. Um, Very exciting because this is the first book I have fully read while living in Iowa now, which is very exciting indeed. Um, I thought in many ways this was a fitting book because O Pioneers is in fact about the pioneers and some of the settling of Nebraska. Um, Willa Cather does a lot in terms of that. I believe, in fact, that's what the vast majority of her pieces are about. Is this settling of kind of Nebraska and the pioneers and things like that, right? So very interesting in that sense. I believe this is the first of her pieces that are about that. But yeah. Certainly there is a great whitewashing effect here, as there usually is with kind of late 1800s, early 1900s pieces that are about Western America and the settling of it. And it certainly is still an issue to this point in time in history, of just imagining America as this great, big, wide open expanse that no one existed, and which is there for the taking, instead of, you know, viewing the world as, and this part of America as being occupied and inhabited and cared for in a lot of ways, just in a different way, right? So yeah, you're certainly seeing that going on, right? You get this envisionment of this part of the country as being this uninhabited space, and the space that no one has ever touched before, rather than being a place that was cared for and was existed in, just in a way that was not the white European way. So you got that going on. That, you know, I mentioned knowledge because it's an important thing, but also it comes up in a couple different ways. Throughout the story, we follow mostly Alexandra, who is this woman who's put in charge of a homestead and does a lot of things right, which we'll come back to in a second. But one of the things that comes up is this relationship between Alexandra and Ivar, and then eventually Marie also has this feeling of that Ivar and Marie are, mostly Ivar though, it gets considered strange or odd because he has this immense reverence for the land, right? And that there's an immense amount of care that should be taken towards it, and that the land is not just for us to use, right? But the land has always existed and will always exist, right? And it is us, up to the people, to take care of it in that sense, right? That the land will be here, has been here, and will always be here, but we are not, and therefore we need to take care of it because it is what everyone else will inherit, right? And Alexandra, towards the end, kind of also gets onto this path of thinking, but it's a very interesting way to think about it, right? Because it's an important way to think about it, and it's this very ecocentric way of thinking about how do we use land and how do we think about land and all these things, right? Which is important. So yeah. The story itself, right, mostly follows Alexandra, as I mentioned. And it's broken up into 5 different parts, in which we kind of see this growth of Alexandra from being this teenager who is the oldest of her generation that and when their father dies, is suddenly asked to be put into control of the homestead effectively, because she's the only one that can think about the homestead rather than just work it, right? And so she gets put in charge of it. And then in part two, it's the growing of it and these issues that she's having with her brothers. And then part three gets more into her relationship with her youngest brother, Emil. Part four then focuses mostly on Emil and Marie, and then part five is all Alexandra and kind of her last takeaways from life, right? But really kind of the through line here is this idea that, like, if you allow it, the prairies and the emptiness and the vastness of this world of the plains in Nebraska and Kansas and things will swallow you and destroy you if you don't take care to not be a part of it, right? And really what kind of ends up happening, right, is you have Alexandra, who sacrifices herself in so many ways to allow for things to be successful, right? Is that she's the one that is willing to take risks and to zag when others are zigging, right? And basically gets nothing out of it, right, for herself. This mostly comes up through her two brothers that are roughly her same age, who I cannot remember the names of. I think it's Lou and Oscar. I think those are the names. But you're dealing with them in the sense of, like, they're these very, very traditional men and very, very conservative men in which the world is, that because they're the ones that are physically working, they're the ones that take ownership of everything, and therefore they're the ones that should be running everything. Whereas what immediately happens is, as soon as their dad dies, they want to sell or sell the farm, because no one is making any profit right now. As soon as hard times come, once they've been on the farm now for a couple of years running it, they want to sell because nothing good immediately is going to come, and everyone else is leaving, right? And this is the thing that's occurring. And you have Alexandra, who is the only one who's keeping in line with things and is trusting in this process and moving forward and doing what the city landowners are doing, which is buying as much land as possible, because of the knowing that it is the land that will become valuable, not necessarily the farm itself. And the brothers just not doing it or not want to be involved with it. But then as soon as it is prosperous and that it turns out that Alexandra was making the right call, and then all of a sudden feeling that they get to run and be in control and make decisions for her, because they are the men and they are wealthy now because of her thinking, right? It's this, in a lot of ways, this play on that America and a lot of Western society is inherently built on the unpaid work and unpaid labor of women, right? That's what inherently a lot of this is founded on. And so you're dealing with this very openly of that, well, she didn't physically do the work and therefore she's not entitled to make decisions, right? And that becomes the brothers' argument in a lot of ways. So you're dealing with a lot of that, which I think is a very, very interesting conversation to have, as always. You then move into this relationship with Emil, right? And Emil being the youngest brother, and Emil ends up having a very who's the Greek? Is it Persephone? I don't remember who it is, but it's the story of the man and the wife, where the wife dies and the man makes a deal with Hades that if he can walk all the way through hell without ever turning to look back at her, then she can be saved, right? And he turns back at the last second after they walk through everything. And that's effectively what ends up happening here, right? Of where Emile has had this love for Marie his entire life and never acted on it, for a variety of reasons, right? Of where you're dealing with this classism thing, right? Of country versus city, which is always another conversation to have, right? Of how do we actively view one another, simply because of where we came from and things, right? So that's occurring. And even though Emile in many ways is going to become a city person, right? Inherently he is from the country. The opposite thing goes for Maria, where she's very much a city person, but has this love affair with the country because of the openness and the freedom that it can provide, right? And so they end up just kind of crossing paths, of where they're just going in opposite directions. And it's this thing of they're both yearning and pining for each other, but they can't do anything about it. Which then eventually leads to this kind of climactic point at the end of part 4, in which Marie's husband, out of jealousy, out of anger, out of fear, out of whatever you want to put it as, ends up killing both of them in the middle of the night, because Emile, instead of has the opportunity to leave, he is leaving. He is going to Lincoln, and then will be eventually going to Ann Arbor to study law and to never come back to this place ever again. And he spends his last free night to go to Marie and then spend time with her. And it gets them killed. It gets both of them killed. And it is this agonizing, heartbreak of climactic point of the reason why Alexandra has done all this stuff, right? Alexandra has not married. She's never even thought about love. She has spent all this time doing things that no one else wants her to do, constantly putting her neck out. And it's so that the people around her can not be married to the land and not be forced to exist here, not be forced to be farmers, and not be forced to be married to the soil. And she does that, and it just turns out that it is just not quite the right time, and that Emile ends up fucking it up, and in a turning around to see one last time, ends up destroying everything, right? Which is kind of a heartbreaking ending, right? Because it right, in so many ways, it is the story of what America is, right? It is the whole idealism is that it is a place in which you can toil and work and do hard things so that the future can have better lives, right? And that is what the goal is, right? And this is a thematic point that comes up again and again, of where it is just that that people are choosing to do things because of immediate payoff, rather than what is going to be the best for the future and the best for continuing on, and the best for, as mentioned earlier, right, that the land will always be here, the land will stay here, and so we need to make decisions that are about longevity rather than what is going to immediately pay off, right? And unfortunately, everything falls apart because of that. So yeah, and then you get the final part, which is Alexandra and basically attempting to forgive Frank, who was Marie's husband, the one that shot both Marie and Emile. And, you know, I'm not so thrilled on the ending, right? Because it is a great deal of this idea that it is, in so many ways, it is Alexandra basically saying that, like, Frank didn't do all that much wrong in killing two people, and that he was in a lot of ways justified in doing so, right? Which isn't a great thing to put in at the end here, right? Because so much of it is like, right, there was no physical abuse between Frank and Marie, right? There's nothing physically went wrong, right? But there was a lot of emotional stuff that went wrong. And there was a lot of threatening stuff that went wrong. A lot of constantly holding back the gun. A lot of, and it was described very directly within the piece of Marie holding back the gun a few different times on, in regards to Frank's anger. And so like there's, yeah, nothing, you didn't physically hate your wife, but you certainly did abuse her in a lot of ways. And it was certainly not a happy place to be in. And that just kind of gets all thrown out the window so that we can have this kind of reconciliation of that, and to further this other point that this big wide open expanse that allows for so much freedom, and yet this amount of freedom is confining and traps you in so many ways because of the way that we are raised, the way that we think, inherently means that there's no movement beyond that, right? So it's a bit of a strange ending for me, that I did not particularly enjoy, but that's that. But that is it. That is Willa Cather's, O Pioneers.